As we move on from 1927, we find ourselves in the next calendar year. The date is January 6, 1928, and the world awaits The Circus, the latest installment from the Tramp himself, simply known as Charlie Chaplin. The circus takes place, well, you guessed it, at a circus, as the Tramp finds himself in a cat and mouse chase with the cops ultimately hiding in plain sight as he gets hired by the circus ringmaster for being funny. There's just one flaw to his entertainment. He can only be funny unintentionally. Filming began on The Circus back in January of 1926. However, many wondered if this film would ever see the light of day as Chaplin faced many adversities on his path to premiere. His film studio caught on fire. A bitter divorce litigation and the death of his mother left Chaplin in a very, very dark place. But as they say, the show must go on. And thankfully it did, because to many this is considered to be Chaplin's masterpiece, and it's the 7th highest grossing silent film in history. Ladies and gentlemen, this is The Circus. Will, I gave you a link to watch this movie, The Circus. And again, this is Charlie Chaplin's film. And this gives us the character, the Tramp. One that Charlie Chaplin did most of his films and did a 20-year stretch of only doing this type of character.
Right.
I sent you a link where you could watch it for free. Did you get a chance to watch that link? Did you find it somewhere else? Did you watch it on the computer, the phone, or your TV screen? What did you find?
Right. Yeah. So I did not watch it at the link. I clicked through the link to make sure it worked. I was like, oh, hey, look, that's gonna work for me. I'll watch it when I get a chance. Sat down to watch it on Friday night. And I have Apple TV, and if you just put the Ask Siri for The Circus, it tells you where it's available. If you have that app, it just lets you click right through to it. So I saw it was on HBO Max, so I just watched it right on my TV there. So
HBO Max, yeah, that makes sense. I kept seeing that it was there. I stopped subscribing that some time ago. I need to get it back now that we're doing this. So good for you, because I think the link I sent you had Italian subtitles to it. So I did not watch that myself either. Before we get your initial reaction though, I must say I had trouble watching this at first because I kind of had OCD. I really wanted to make sure that we're watching the very first version of this film if it's available, right? So, and I'm not sure that maybe you even caught on to this. So I started watching the link that I sent you. Actually, I found a different link on Vimeo that didn't have the Italian copyright or the Italian subtitles. So I started watching, and I got about as far as 26 seconds in. And you know me, I'm taking my notes because that's the best way for me to kind of stay engaged the whole time and kind of capture some things that maybe I wouldn't normally see. And 26 seconds in, I see something that says title lyrics sung by Charlie Chaplin. So before I got to that slate, I remember thinking to myself, oh my gosh, what a beautiful song to start this out with. I was very excited for the trajectory of this film based on just the opening scene, right?
Sure, yeah.
But I kind of had some prior knowledge. So I know that Charlie Chaplin wasn't on screen being heard singing or even speaking until 1936 with his movie Modern Times. And this movie came out in 1928. So I started doing some research. I said, okay, wait a minute. I pressed pause. I thought, okay, maybe this was re-released. There's something going on here. That's what happened. So in 1967, this movie was rescored and re-released by Charlie Chaplin. The issue is that I don't know what the original score for this movie was. And
Okay.
it wasn't from the lack of trying. I do know, let me go to my notes here real quick. I do
Sure.
know that in 1928, the original soundtrack was done by Arthur Kay. The music was. After that, there's nothing stating whether or not this Swing Low Little Girl, the opening song that was sang, there's nothing
Yeah.
stating whether or not that was even in the opening credits. So my
Oh, okay.
guess is there wasn't much of a score to this movie in the very beginning. So I don't believe there is a version of this movie that exists to the public where the public can get their hands on it
Right.
that doesn't have anything other than the rescore done by Charlie Chaplin.
Interesting. Yeah, I did see, because I do watch everything with subtitles. I did see at the bottom it tells you who is singing, and it said
Right.
Charlie Chaplin. So I just thought, this is pretty cool that he was singing his own song, directing the movie, doing everything for this one. But I guess that's not the case. So I'm learning something today too, folks.
Well, that's what I would try to do. Try to keep it as interesting as I can for you. So, long story short, I end up, going and typing in like original, trying to find this thing. And finally, I went to Amazon Prime, typed it in. I'm thinking, okay, I'll throw $3 at this thing just to once again see if I get a different version. Within the first 5 seconds, I hear that voice, and I'm like, well, I wasted $3, but it's okay. I get to watch it on my television now. Not a big deal.
Yeah.
So give me your initial reactions of this film, even after hearing let's take it for what we saw with the rescore, Charlie Chaplin, his version of the score that accompanies the movie. What was your initial reactions?
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised by this movie. One of the things I was very fascinated by, not I watched the first probably half hour of this movie by myself. It was
Okay.
probably, I think I was up at like 6 o'clock in the morning and everyone else was still asleep. I was like, I'm just going to go watch this right now. Pulled up on the TV. And then the last about an hour of the movie, I had my kids kind of watching around the fringes because, usually when dad watches a movie, kids can't be around for that kind of stuff. But this one, I figured, this is probably going to be, for kid friendly, and they were pretty interested in what was going on, and part of that had to do with the nature of the movie, being the circus.
Sure.
There was animals in it. There was the monkey scene, was very very funny, but I was very surprised by just how modern the comedy felt. Because we see this, you can see the lineage kind of through this. If you've watched comedy over the last 30, 40 years, you can see how Charlie Chaplin has probably influenced some of the comedians, thinking specifically here of Jim Carrey. But I was pleasantly surprised by how funny this was, and I was also very happy to see it was pretty progressive film. I thought it had a kind of feminist undertone, and I wasn't expecting that, and I like this movie a lot.
Interesting. We'll come back to the feminist tone to it because I want to talk on that too.
Sure.
Throw you a couple names that I thought of when you were talking about, basically impersonation is the greatest form of flattery. You mentioned Jim Carrey. Obviously, physical acting sticks out right away, right? And there's physical actors all the way up till Jim Carrey. Even now, Will Ferrell did a really good job of that. You think about the '70s, like with Belushi and them.
Mm.
Where I don't know, that's kind of where like my early days, my own prior knowledge goes. That's why we're doing this project, and we'll get some names more as we go. I thought about Mr. Bean.
Oh, okay.
And just how great he was. Now he made noises, but you really, it's more like if Sims was a comedy, Mr. Bean was that. I remember
Yeah.
loving Mr. Bean because his physical way of like, and not just physical way, it's circumstantial comedy where, like, depending on the setting he's in, he didn't contrive anything. He just used what was given in the scene. I thought Charlie Chaplin, especially as the character the Tramp, did a really great job in, this movie especially, but it sounds like from the scope of his career, did a really great job of doing that. And then during this time period, I did some research. Well, there was a guy named Billy West. You ever heard of this name?
I have not.
So the studio heads, uh, when Charlie Chaplin came out, he was working with a studio called First National, and he became a millionaire really, really fast, according to the research, and he signed an 8 film deal with a studio called First National, and from 1914 to around 1919, he made 8 films, all silent, all having to do with the character the Tramp. And
Mm-hmm.
just for some context, 1914, his second film, is when he introduced the Tramp. So he signed a whopping $680,000 contract with this company back in
Yeah,
1914. Think about that.
sure.
His comedies and his way of storytelling was so popular that studio heads tried to emulate not just him, but straight rip off his character, the
Okay.
Tramp. And Billy
Yeah.
West is most successful at doing that. They call him more of a mid-successful version of Charlie Chaplin that came from other studios that couldn't get Charlie Chaplin. So
Sure.
you're right. It's just interesting because it was so popular, especially during that time frame. My initial reaction to the film is I took it as more of like a surreal. Like, again, Kylie,
Hmm.
for everybody that's listening, Kylie, my girlfriend. Um, and by the way, I want to get to a new segment of the show here in a second. I'll tell you about that in a
Uh-oh.
minute. But Kylie, my girlfriend, she would ask me at the end, "So, did you like it?" And to be honest with you, going back even to the jazz singer, I'm not sure the answer is yes or no to that right now. You know what I
Okay.
mean? Um,
Sure.
because I'm watching through more of an educational lens right now. I'm just
Yeah.
excited to be watching them, and it to me it was more like, and I don't know if you got this or not, and maybe I'm a little off for this, but to me it's in a weird way, it's like surreal. I'm like watching a Charlie Chaplin film. To me, it's patriotic even though
Oh,
he's an English storyteller. To me, cinema is ingrained in, like, just as much in American roots as any country like Germany or France or Japan or England that has these types of, film goes that far back. To me, it was almost patriotic. Like,
hmm.
I enjoy sitting down here doing this, especially with you, but like watching a Charlie Chaplin film back to me feels like it just felt patriotic. I enjoyed it. I there was a couple moments where I genuinely laughed out loud. Sometimes when you're watching this, you're kind of contriving it. You're like, oh, that's funny, giving it a little more than maybe the scene really deserves. But
Yeah.
no, I enjoyed it. From my understanding with the research as well, Will, is that this was like his best told narrative up to this point.
Okay.
Um, so it was kind of good to see that because maybe we wouldn't have enjoyed it as much if it was, if we were starting this thing a few years prior. Um,
Right.
but yeah, now you mentioned that you thought this had feminist tones. Give
Mhm.
me give me a couple examples if you have them of why you felt that way. Because I kind of
Well,
thought that too.
yeah. So, I mean, the biggest thing, the obvious thing, is the ringmaster, right? The leader
The
of the
father.
circus, the father. Yeah, and his treatment of his daughter is just, it's not looked at it's looked at as normal. Like, I don't think anybody finds it to be like the characters. I mean, in the movie, don't seem to think it's out of place, but when the tramp gets there and he starts to insert himself into the film, into the scene, into the circus, he starts to use he is making a moral claim about how he's acting, and he feels so strongly about that, where the maybe less kind of overt feminist message here is like the tramp puts Myrna, the daughter, before himself in the climax of the movie, right?
Right.
So he doesn't he you can see that he's jealous that she's in love with the tightrope walker, right? But he's also not willing to damn her because of that. He's willing to put her desires as equal to his, and even, you know, even executes her desires on top of his, in order for her to be happy. And that's not something I was expecting to see from a movie in 1928. So I was pretty moved that was, he's directing the film. He's probably, this is a creative, something that he's creating, and it's his decision, and he decides to, put the protagonist of the movie is not the one that, matters in the end. It's the daughter. So I just thought that was pretty powerful stuff.
No, I actually, you're right. I hope we're not spoiling anything here for anybody. You had 100 years here to basically watch it, but uh,
Yeah, get
you're
over it.
right. You're right. That's ultimately what ends up happening. He sacrifices his own selfish desires for the needs of hers. Um, and
Mhm.
being the fact that he was not only the director of this, the producer of this, he later scored this, he wrote this, and as he did most of his pieces. And I come to find out later he was a perfectionist and he didn't trust a lot of people with that. And that makes sense to why he did so many, wore so many hats. Um, I want to go back on something you said that I found to be interesting. This is the part that I think. Well, last week on the show we talked about blackface in culture in the 1920s. Um,
Yeah.
Maybe we should talk about. You said it was almost like a matter of fact, just very normal that the audience is supposed to take the treatment of the daughter of Myrna from
Mm.
her own father, um, as just like normal place,
Mm.
commonplace. I found that to be interesting because of the nature of violence that was thrust upon Myrna by her own father. And I
Right.
kind of was thinking to myself, like, not just in 2023, but you go back even, 2000s early or even in the 90s. I don't know when the point was, but I don't believe if movies were made in the 70s or 80s, this is still the type of way we're showing distaste in what our daughter's performance is, even from the most grotesque type of parents. Now, I'm sure there's versions that slip my mind that exist, but it does, to me, this came off as like every film would showcase
Mm.
this type of violence against their daughters, wives, whatever, just, a masculine, hyper masculine man in the household. Uh, did you kind of get that same feeling then? And do you believe today they go about telling it in a different manner?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, today for sure, things have changed over the last, I mean, 10-ish years probably is when we really started thinking about these, concepts in a little bit more depth, especially around, violence towards women, and not just violence towards women, but violence towards marginalized communities. Right?
Right.
It could be gay or trans or, um, you know any type of community that's marginalized. So, I think you're right. I think one of the things I kind of lack knowledge on, and we kind of discussed this off air, but you know, when film was first becoming, a product that was put in front of consumers, there was a lot more female directors and a lot more, um, directors that, it wasn't driven just by, uh, male sensibilities or masculine sensibilities. So I wonder if there's some, as things you know as things become more ingrained in, the money making, mechanisms, and male dominance kind of starts to take over some of these areas, especially around film. If maybe these types of movies where you have a male character that's willing to see his female love interest as equal and not just something to acquire, might
Right.
kind of start to dwindle out, and we start to get these hyper masculine, you know, movies. But there's romance movies in the 30s and 40s and 50s. I mean, one of the best movies ever is Casablanca. So, that's a fairly romantic movie, about a man and woman falling in love. So, long story short, I think you're right, that masculinity started to dominate how we told stories, and that kind of persists through the 90s and even into the 2000s. But as time went on, I think there started to be places where, where
pushback.
yeah,
Yeah.
where different types of voices started to get in, and now I mean, there's a real movement towards trying to make sure that all. I mean, if you watch the Oscars, there's a very strong push towards marginalized communities being able to make their films and have their voices heard. So
Yeah. I guess, would it be oversimplifying it to say that it is a silent film, so everything's physical nature, that they added this because it's a physical, to kind of get the point across? Was there no way to express, disappointment in a daughter without the physicality coming from the father? Would that not come across? I mean, they do interject. I guess I'm asking a question that I already know the answer to in my own opinion. I just curious your thoughts on that. Is that oversimplifying it?
no, I would imagine there's probably some of that. I mean, I think again, I'm speaking from a place of kind of um, novice, right? I'm a novice in
Sure.
this stuff. I can't say much about films before the jazz singer, but like you know, there's two types of things happening in a movie, right? There's the people that are making the movie, and then there's the way that it's received. And like the way the world exists is at this time, I think it's commonplace to strike your daughter, to strike your son, to strike your wife, because that's just the way it is. When you're mad and you can't take it out on anybody else, the man comes home and takes it out on his family.
Right.
But then there's the creator, what he's trying to say with this showing the violence is, I think he's trying to say like this is not how we should act. So I think yeah, I think there's something there for sure.
Point well taken. Point well taken, buddy. I think one thing, just listening to what you said there, that I kind of had this thought. Far too often, I tend to think of like, you have the women's suffrage, you have the civil rights, movements, you have all these things, and you tend to think that life was always anti them or this prior, right? And then this happened, and then they got their liberties and their freedoms, and then, they never
Right.
had it prior. But I don't know that that's necessarily how life is. I think there was peaks and valleys
Sure.
of when women, like we started off talking about how women were directing these films in the beginning of when, this new art form when it first came out, and it wasn't until there was a power grab, right? And
Mhm.
then these kind of limitations on these minority groups kind of came into play. So it's not like life is like constantly on this upward trajectory. There's like moments and times throughout history where, black people are considered free until they're considered slaves. And then, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I just think that was kind of like a eureka moment when you were talking there, that it hit me that life is not this. It's always been this. And who knows where
Yeah.
we are in the chapter of that. So,
Revolution
interesting.
and counter revolution.
Say that again.
Revolution and counter revolution. It's
Okay.
yeah, it's how it goes, man. There's a group that wants to make changes and make the world a little bit more fitting for their group to be included in the rights and liberties of others, and then the people who strike back at that when there's some gains made. So, I mean, take it a little less political. I mean, you can see this in film, right? In the 80s, 90s, 2000s, where you have a sexual revolution, right? Where
Right.
people are becoming a little bit more open to sex on film, and you get your basic instincts or fatal attractions, and you get to see people nude on screen. And then, there's the counter revolution where you get pushback, and now it's very rare to see nudity on screen. So,
Yeah, I would say there's I don't know if it's a counter. I would say it's counter revolution against comedy, and I think maybe it's starting to kind of make its way back a little bit. I feel like we've went through that, and now people are like, to me, you say counter revolution. I always say it's an overcorrection,
mm,
and not necessarily a bad thing, but like sometimes society, you can ask, you're not getting it. There's this overcorrection, and then it's kind of got to come back to a balancing point, and then whatever the next, topic of resistance or revolution that needs to be done, there's an overcorrection. So,
right.
whatever way you want to look at it, let's dive into the movie. Okay.
All
Circus,
right.
like I said, came out January 6th, 1928. That was in New York. January 27th, 1928. That was when it debuted in Los Angeles. This movie made $3.8 million. It was considered to be the seventh highest grossing film up till that point in cinema history. And again, this is like 2 months removed from Al Jolson and the Jazz Singer. From my understanding, Charlie Chaplin was a big proponent of not giving in to the talkies because it was his opinion that the physical acting type of comedy that he was delivering would not work in a talkie. So he's actually the latest and the last director to continue to make silent films well into the 30s, with his last silent film being that one I talked about earlier, being Modern Times, where we actually hear him for the first time. But that was still considered to be his last silent film, part silent film. So I thought it was this. I was actually wrong, so I wanted to correct that from last week's show. But
Gotcha.
yeah, so what scenes kind of stand out to you? Because to me, I got to tell you, the opening scene with, and I know it's been rescored, but like hearing Charlie Chaplin's version of this song, Swing Little Girl, and just kind of the way it opened up really set the tone for me for the way this story was going to be.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, that whole first scene with the cops was just it was genius. It was really well done, and like from him just being so shocked to find the money to being willing to like hand it back over just immediately to stay out of trouble. It was like a blessing and a curse at the same time. So that first scene, I think, really set the tone for the rest of the movie. So
Yeah,
that
and
would be my favorite.
that first scene for you, yeah. I have a funny scene, the pickpocketer and the tramp running from the cops, where they both kind of come into frame, and they're both running at the same time. That was one of the moments where I laughed out loud. I was like, "Oh, that's really funny." You've seen that throughout history, but you just wonder if this, kind of originated with him. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. I don't know, but there was also like little scenes that kind of stood out to me. Another one was, let me find this here. Where was it? I'm losing it here.
Other one. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say the hiccup scene I thought was really good. The other one I liked was when he was breaking the hay. I don't know if you picked up on that. There was where he's like pulling little strings of hay out and he's like breaking it to like show like he's standing up to the ringmaster. And as he's, or not the ringmaster. Yeah, there was a ringmaster at the time, and he's breaking the hay as if he's like some big strong man. Like if you don't see that and pick up on that, it goes right over your head. But when you see that, you're like, okay, this is funny.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, the lion and the tiger scene, that was really well done. And then of course the scene where he takes on the tightrope walking. Man, that was really well done as well.
That was really well done. Technology aspect of this, how they shot that tiger and lion scene. Like I was kind of looking for like an overlay, but it feels to me like he was really in the cage with those two. And if it wasn't, I'm not sure how they kind of compiled that together during that time. What's your thoughts? Were those just like born from day one with human animal? You know what I mean? Were they just circus bred? That's why they were so used to humans, so they didn't bothered by them. How do you think Charlie got away with that?
Yeah, no, that had to have been real circus animals, right? Like, there's no way the lion could have been sedated. I mean, I don't know,
Oh, okay,
because
fair enough.
he was passed out for a while, and I don't think animal rights were at the forefront in 1928. But I would imagine they were circus animals, which is why he did not get mauled, because it did look like he was really in those cages for sure.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. And talking about circumstantial comedy, physical acting, he did a really good job here. Myrna Kennedy, she's the lady that played the ringmaster's daughter. Thoughts on her performance, what you took away from her or the ringmaster or even the tightrope walker, outside of Charlie, who kind of carried the scene with you?
Yeah, I mean, Myrna was pretty good in this. I didn't think she was, I didn't think she was like a standout or anything, but she definitely held her weight. She wasn't asked to do a ton, so I think that's part of it. The ringmaster was pretty good. What was the guy? He was like the property guy that was like like the guy that took care of everything. I thought the scenes that he had with Chaplin were really well done. I
Tiny
think he had
Sanford. Yeah. The head
okay.
property man is known. He's
Okay.
Tiny Sanford. His name was actually
Okay.
Tiny.
Okay. Well, he was a big man, so I guess that's the irony there. But yeah, no, I thought their scenes together were really well done. Now that we're kind of hashing this out, I'm recalling a little bit more, especially around the scene where he's trying out with the cream pies,
Oh
or
yeah.
the shaving cream. That I thought that scene was really good. So the ringmaster, I think he did pretty good. Um, Everyone was serviceable, right? There was a bunch of guys that could start on a championship team, Robert. But uh, no superstars here besides Charlie Chaplin.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. He's head and shoulders above everyone. Al Ernest Garcia, just to kind of keep the names out there, was the guy that played the ringmaster. He was the circus proprietor. Um, I I read on Wikipedia that the idea behind this film was to make it so that uh, the tramp, or the little tramp as we know it, discovers that he can only be funny unintentionally,
Hmm.
right? And to me, that unintentional part, that really sticks with me of modern day comedies, right? The guys that accidentally put their foot in a mop bucket and now they're trying to get that out. Like
Yeah,
that's a tale as old as time, and it works with a certain group of people. Like you said, your kids were
yeah,
kind of paying attention to this. Um,
yeah,
like, that's a pretty cool moment that you got to share with your family there, even if it was side eye paying attention as
yeah,
they were beating the crap out of action figures or whatever, something else, like
yeah.
that's a pretty cool moment that you got to share that with them. And maybe questions will come later as to who that man was or whatnot. So,
Yeah. No, my oldest Eleanor, she's 6 now. She from, the time she was 2, she's been obsessed with movies. Just loves stories. She loves reading books. My son just likes throwing stuff at me. So he's not quite ready for movies yet, but Eleanor, I'm definitely excited like as she's getting a little bit older to start experiencing some of these movies with her. So,
um, I wanted to reference a couple things that Charlie Chaplin, after this came out, um,
yeah.
Charlie Chaplin had a hard time referencing this movie because it was stated that he was going through a 2-year tough period in his life.
Mm,
He had the IRS down his back for potentially owing back taxes.
mm,
He was going through a divorce, and according to records, he's somebody who loved hard, and when love was gone, he took it even harder.
okay.
And we'll get into in a bit the man that Charlie Chaplin was, with his many wives and I'm not sure if you knew this or not, but his many teenage wives. Um,
A
so
little bit.
Okay, we'll get into that. Just to kind of keep going with the movie itself, we talked a little bit about the technology. I just wanted to bring up a few other things that I thought was interesting. So they're in the maze early on in the movie when the cops chasing them. The mirror maze, and
Yeah.
I just thought, and maybe I missed it. So maybe they were on an angle, but from my perspective, it looked like the mirror was flat, straight on to where a camera would be. I'm not sure
Mhm.
how they would go about maybe hiding that into the editing scene. You know what I mean? Because it's not like things were digital; you could remove anything. I
Right.
thought that was clever. Maybe the mirror was tilted enough that we couldn't see the camera through the mirror, but like
Yeah.
somehow finding a way to hide the camera from the scene, I thought was really good. The technology part where he steps out of his body at the end of the movie. Uh,
Mm.
as he's tightrope walking, right? He steps out of his
Yeah,
body. That was really well done. So some of
for
those
sure.
technology parts, and it just makes you wonder if, like, man, this stuff was happening years prior to me, even 1928. But to me, it just sticks out because it's like, how would you have done that during that time? Um,
Yeah.
and and even more so, I'm sure there was a complicated process to pull that off. So for Charlie Chaplin to throw that in there, it feels like it's important to the story now. You know what I mean? It's a necessity
Right.
because of the amount of work it takes to put in there. So, um, yeah, those were just a couple of the technology pieces that stood out to me. Was there anything I'm missing maybe that, on the technology front?
Um, no, I was thinking, I wasn't thinking too much about the technology on this one. I was kind of like, there were some scenes that were very familiar. So like you brought up when they kind of converge and the cops are chasing them and they're running side by side. I love this movie called Kung Fu Hustle. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but there's a couple of scenes where the people are running and their legs are like running, like they're sped up digitally, so their legs are like spinning like wheels, and it just made me think about how some of our favorite films, the stuff that we watch, and how those directors have drawn from their favorite films, or their, because they're watching all of these films, they're watching the history of film and trying to study and learn, and it's just interesting to see some of those scenes that I know and love, like, oh, I can see the lineage here. So, yeah, I was kind of thinking about this more in terms of like lineage and, like, like the comedy and the scenes and the way you can see it, in some of the movies that are a little bit newer today.
Yeah, I love it. This is why I love that we're doing this, because like we're getting a greater perspective of where some of these things might have started. You know,
Hmm.
um, maybe they did, maybe they didn't, but at least now we have 100. We can reference 100 years here and say, oh yeah, that's been around forever. You know what I mean?
Right.
Nothing, and it almost makes you wonder if anything today is new at all outside of the technology
Mm.
aspect. You know what I mean? Um,
Sure.
so yeah, that part makes sense to me. Um, the last thing that I wanted to say about this movie is in the genius, and you used the word genius with Charlie Chaplin, but like the genius component of the timing of all of this type of physical, you know, comedy. Not
Hmm.
just physical comedy, but physical acting. And I wonder how much, we talked about the frames per second on last week's episode. I wonder how much of that he had to adjust for.
Mm.
Or if this just played right into what he was going for. You know what I mean? I wonder if you had to tweak the timing of something because it didn't work once you put it into a projector screen, or if you
Yeah.
had to really slow it down with the acting to make it not so crazy once you put it into a projector screen. Um,
Yeah.
I
Huh.
just I started thinking about this in the scene where he's running out into the circus, and he goes behind the magician door, and the
Mm.
guy comes and follows him, and then he walks by the magician's door, and then he comes back, he goes underneath. Just like the whole timing of that is just, it's flawless, and it just makes you
Hmm.
wonder, is this something that is acted over and over and over again until they get the perfect one, or is there a way for them to have slowed it down given the advantage of the slower frames per second, knowing that the projector is going to speed it up? Like, I just curious how that might play into the craft at the time. So
Yeah, no, I hadn't really thought about that. No, that's interesting to think about, because you're right. There is a preciseness to how this movie unfolded, right? There's a preciseness, like there's not a ton of like foreshadowing, but there's things that are set up in frame that become important for the next scene, like the monkeys, for instance. Like, it's not a huge moment. You see the barrel of monkeys, and then the next scene they're crawling all over him. Like, so there's some stuff there where he's using the whole frame to tell the story, which is also just kind of tells you about how precise he was. And you mentioned he was kind of a perfectionist, so I guess that kind of makes a little bit of sense then,
yeah, it goes hand in hand. Yeah, yeah.
for sure.
Um, okay, you ready for some? Well, I'll give you some final thoughts. Well, I don't do final thoughts yet. Uh,
Okay.
Hard hitting questions. Are you
Oh,
ready?
yes.
All right. Too soon. Actually, I don't want to word it this way. I don't want to do it. We'll do it this way. Who owned that mustache more? Is it Hitler, or is it Chaplin? Because Chaplin, again, Hitler exists at this time. We know he was a runner in World War I. World War II is upon us. It's still about 11 years off, and we know, obviously, it's so infamous with Hitler. Chaplin, do you think after World War II he was rocking? Because I don't know what Charlie lived to be 88 years old. Was he
Right.
rocking, or was this just what he did for the Tramp? Is this just for the Tramp character?
Yeah, I don't know if it's just for the Tramp. I think he uses it for more than just the Tramp, but I I would imagine that those mustaches went out of style after Hitler, so it's hard to say that Hitler doesn't own the stash, the look. But Chaplin owned Hitler in The Dictator, so
Dude, I was just gonna go there.
that might
Yes.
be the answer. Yeah.
Dude, I wonder if that's like his comeback to that, like his great pushback, because he made the Great Dictator in 1940, and that's a year into World War II. I just wonder if that's him saying, "Dude, give me my mustache back." Also, okay, next hard hitting question: are we completely satisfied with the ending? Do we want Charlie Chaplin to get Myrna? Where are you at? I know where you went with the feminist and the desires. As a straight viewer, are you
Right.
satisfied with that?
Um. No. Right. No, because I have a hard time, even if the character is bad, not wanting the character to win, right?
Okay,
So like,
interesting.
you watch, the best example is Breaking Bad, right? You like Walter White is an absolute shit person who doesn't deserve to win anything, but you're still at the end want him to win. And so it's hard to not like when the person is maybe a little chaotic but good, the Tramp, to not want them to win, but also like maybe he's winning. The last scene he's moving on to something else, and who knows what's over that field that he's walking on. You
So
know,
actually, that's that kind of final scene. That's kind of his trademark, right?
Mm.
So I learned that him walking off camera into the distance became Charlie Chaplin's kind of, not just Charlie Chaplin, but the Tramp. That was like
Okay.
his way to end movies, to say goodbye. So I think if I'm going to go out on a limb and say this, my context after reading something like that is like, I'm okay with the ending to this film because to the greater context of the character, the Tramp, my guess is
Yeah.
he's always going on to the next thing. Um,
Yeah.
but in a one-off, no, I'm with you. Like
Yeah.
I'm watching 70 minutes of this film on the common man. The common man I want to believe that I can get the girl at the end. I want to believe, because if not, then I'm just sitting there with something in my hand watching somebody else enjoy the weekend. So I just, you know what I mean? So that's kind of my thoughts on it. With that being said, with everything we've talked about, the conclusion and the ending of this film, we did have him kind of sitting there by himself. He's got his famous walk off into the distance. Any thoughts on the final scene? I kind of drew a conclusion from it, and it's backed up here by a couple other uh, uh, film historians.
Okay.
And I'm just curious, before I kind of stooge off what that is, if you picked up anything there at all, or if you just kind of took it at face value.
Yeah, I mean, it's mostly face value, but also like, maybe a little, maybe not the point that he was trying to make, but do you want to be trapped at the circus? Because that's what's going to happen if you marry Myrna, right? Like you're trapped in that life, man. And I think maybe, maybe that's why he walks off into the distance on this one. He's like, yeah, sure, Myrna. Maybe I'm in love with Myrna, but it comes with a bunch of other stuff I'm not. So I don't know. That was my
Hey,
only thought.
okay. I tend to romanticize it a little bit more than that, and I think the timeline of what I'm about to say would contradict my point, but I'm gonna say it
Mm.
anyways, as if it's true. I concluded at the end, and then I'll read what I found if I can find it again here. My conclusion was: am I looking too deep to call the circus the silent era, and Chaplin alluding to it being over with or moving on by walking away from camera?
Mm.
Is this kind of like his way? you get what I'm saying of like
Yeah.
acknowledging that there's this new circus coming into town. It's the talkies, it's sound, and the circus as we know it, and not just the circus as we know it, but the literal circus as we know it was, coming to an end as well. Um, it's kind of like the end of an era type thing. That's kind of the way I took it, even though this movie was made, a couple years prior to even Al Jolson and the Jazz Singer coming out. You have to assume that the people knew of the technology prior to obviously October's release in 1927 of the Jazz Singer. So you have to assume that he kind of knew the end of the silent era was coming. That's where I kind of put this. I don't know if you think there's any truth to that or not, but I found a film historian basically, and I can't find it right now, unfortunately, who backed that up, who kind of came to the same conclusion by saying that he was the greatest clown of an entire generation, making us smile, laugh, and all the things in between. But now with the silent film coming to an end, there's no need for clowns anymore. That was kind of his paraphrasing of his summary there. Any thoughts on that at all, or are we looking too deep into this?
No, I think, well, yeah, I think you're probably looking a little too deep into it, mostly because you're using a lot of hindsight to draw your conclusion here.
Sure.
And if you're looking back on something, this is how we do purpose, right? Like, this happened for a purpose. We look
We
back
attach
on the
meaning.
thing. We try to attach meaning to it to bring us where we are now as being meaningful. And I think that might be a little bit of what you're doing here. Maybe Chaplin was saying something, but if he was doing this, full disclosure, I before I watched this, I didn't even realize that the Tramp was a recurring character, right? Had no idea.
Okay.
But if he was signing off with most of his movies like this, um, it seems kind of like maybe he was just signing off his movie. But
Fair enough. Yeah, right. Because then now I'm attaching the same meaning to every film that he did prior when he gave that same ending, right? You're right. I know it's not true, but I still, part of me wants to believe it anyways. And damn it, I can do that. So,
yeah,
um,
go for it.
uh, let's talk about Charlie Chaplin, man. Actually, you give me your final thoughts on the movie if you have any. Before we kind of dive into Charles Chaplin, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't kind of set up this being our first Chaplin episode. Maybe we'll get to The Great Dictator. Maybe we won't. City
Mm-hmm.
Lights, things of that nature we might get to that are considered to be, and this was one of them, one of his four best pieces of work.
Yeah.
Just final thoughts on this film, if you have any, before we put this to bed.
Yeah, I would say that this was very good. I was very impressed with just how well everything unfolded. I was very impressed with his timing, and if you're somehow watching or listening to this and didn't actually watch the movie, I would definitely, this is one I would recommend that you watch, even if you're not watching 100 years of film and you just want to watch something that's kind of good. Like, I would say that this is a kind of good movie. So
I was telling you earlier, I teased a new segment on the show called I'm calling it the Kylie segment.
okay,
To reference when Kylie fell asleep during the Jazz Singer, it was at the
mm,
9-minute, 29-second mark. We actually made it about another 6 minutes into this one. So we got about 15 minutes in. So my takeaway is that as we get deeper into this thing, Kylie, who for the
yeah,
listeners is about 12 years younger than me, she is getting a little bit, she's able to stay awake a little bit longer. Granted, I did watch this Wednesday night, started at around 12:30 in the morning, so there is that
uh,
as well. But
yeah,
yeah,
maybe not fair.
just wanted to say that Kylie made it to 15-minute mark. So um, let's talk about Charlie Chaplin the man. What do you know before I dive into some of his anecdotes here?
Yeah, to be completely honest, it's probably about 2% of the important stuff, right? I know some anecdotal stuff, like he had some weird marriages, and that is about it. So I'm kind of relying on you to kind of educate me on a couple things here.
All right. Well, I'm going to rely on you to do some math for me. So I'm going to give you this number. He was born in 1889. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Now let's talk about his marriages. He married 4 times. 3 of them were to teenagers. Okay.
Okay.
1918. So you do the math on that. I'll give it to you. 1918, Chaplin married a 17-year-old actress named Mildred Harris. A decision both would come to soon regret, saying they were in I can't even pronounce this word. Irreconcilably mismated. I don't know, whatever the word is. Basically, irreconcilable. Thank you. They thought she was pregnant, found out she wasn't. They got a divorce quickly after that. How old would that have put Chaplin?
27.
Okay. All right. 1920 or 27, 17, and 1920 or in 1918. Okay. We move on from there. He marries a 16-year-old named Lita Gray, another actress from who he had a bitter breakup with.
Okay.
And it doesn't give the date there. But in 1943, I believe he was 54, Chaplin married 18-year-old Una O'Neill. And I believe, she was 18, he was 54, married Una O'Neill. And this one stayed. They ended up being together until he was 88. They had 8 kids. They died both happily married and the whole thing. So any takeaway from that? And before, I don't want your general thoughts on this. I'm going to ask you a hard-hitting question that's not actually in our segment here.
Okay.
Does distance in time and lack of knowledge and really, let's be honest, lack of interest in this case, right? Because of the time that's separated where Charlie Chaplin was in that, play a part into our thoughts on Charlie Chaplin. So I'm going to preface this with something else. Someone like a Roman, what's that one director's name? Roman Atkinson? Roman Polanski. Roman Polanski.
Yeah.
Roman Polanski. So now he's another one that has been touted to have had relationships. Great director, touted to be one of the great minds of his time at the time, but has had a career that has been kind of up and down and hindered with this kind of always overhanging.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Where are we at with Chaplin and those types of things? Like, does that play a part, or is it, again, does he get a pass because of the times and now we're smarter because of it, or is all of what I'm saying really just circumstantial to or relevant to the country you live in, because it's all different it's all relative based on where you're at in the world? Like, does that play a part into it for you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Some of these, right, I don't want to get I don't want to.
And you don't have to speak on just like the marriages, but like just general laws and how we look at laws.
Yeah. No, so with this, it's a little bit harder because it doesn't sound like any of these I don't want to say anything too wrong here, but it sounds like the relationships were mutual.
Mutual.
So
Yep.
there's a little bit of that. It counts. I mean, 27 and 17 is different than the last one where you're 54 and 16, right?
54 and 18 was the last one. I don't know how old he was when he married the 16-year-old.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It really, if there's consent, a very popular word today, an important word today, but a lot more popular now. If they were consenting and they were in love, I don't have much judgment for that. I can be a little suspicious of it. But if they went on to have 8 kids, I think that tells you something.
Sure.
So, and I don't know a lot about him, so I can't say.
I'm asking you an impossible question. I don't want you to, incriminate yourself with any thought here, but I just was curious. Just the general laws and things of that nature, if that plays an impact, because it does feel like there's, and maybe more so 5-6 years ago, we were kind of going back and whitewashing all of history and kind of banning any celebratory comment towards anything or anyone that might have went down this road in any way, as if we were all perfect human beings.
Right.
So it seems maybe there's less of that now, or maybe there's just nothing that's coming to the in the media at the moment because it's taken over by other things. Um,
Yeah,
I wanted to get to this next point, and this is an interesting anecdote that maybe you didn't know about either, and this would be the last one, and I think we can kind of wrap up Charlie Chaplin and um, well, I got two more, but the one here
okay,
is the United States. So he was never a citizen of the United States. He was born in England,
okay,
or it was I don't know. He was born in London, England, um, but he had did a 40-year career in the United States where he did most of his filming and whatnot. Once he got going, um, he was exiled in
mm,
1952 for being and this kind of goes to Oppenheimer movie we just kind of watched over the summer,
sure,
for being a communist sympathizer.
hmm
Okay, so in 1936, the movie we talked about a little bit, Modern Times, came out, and right away it was a satire of the machine age, and apparently he gained a reputation as a communist sympathizer. And then when the McCarthy era started, and maybe you would know a little bit more about this than I would, um, it seems that he put the FBI and did a surveillance on him and constantly did that. And when Chaplin went back home in 1952, he tried to get back in the United States and found out that he had been um, his what am I thinking of? His reentry permit had
yeah,
yep
okay,
his had been denied, and therefore he was then uprooted to live back in England, and then eventually settled in Switzerland, and only came back to the United States one more time after that point. I didn't know that about the man. I had no idea. And maybe you can spread a little bit more information on that McCarthy era than I can. But that was in the 50s, correct? All that kind of started in the early 50s, or was it even earlier than that?
post World War II.
Okay.
That's really, that's when the Cold War begins. That's when Germany's split in half, and the Soviet Russia takes one half, and the United States and Western Europe kind of take the other half. And there's communist became the dirty word. If you were a communist, you were bad, and that really started after World War II. So, and then McCarthy really in the 50s and early 60s is when it really started to kind of take effect. So, I didn't realize that about Chaplin either, that he'd been exiled.
I didn't either, and I thought it was an interesting anecdote. But the only thing, and the reason I thought it was, worthy to mention on the show is because I know we're really trying to. Maybe I'm overreaching here, and maybe we'll talk off camera, or you can do it on camera. I don't care. You can say that maybe I'm tying too much into society and whatnot, but that was the component of the show that I really thought stood out from some of these other film critique shows. Is that the thing when I was reading this that stood out to me was the word communist sympathizer, right? Here we are in 2023. And again, we can save our thoughts overall, but like maybe there's a conversation to be had here with like Trump, who is still leading the Republican Party, not even close. He's facing what, four indictments. He's got all these things that seem to be going against him in his public life, but yet still all it does is continue to help him. But when you listen to some of the rhetoric that he throws out there, he says like he it might not be communist sympathizer, but he talks about some of these people who sympathize with other things in the same kind of realm
Yep.
as McCarthy. And it kind of blows my mind that here we are damn near 70, 80 years later. And even though the verbiage is different, it still kind of feels to me like a similar road. You getting any of
Oh,
that? And
yeah. Oh,
okay.
oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean it's calculated. It's otherizing, and it's casting aspersions to people who aren't. I mean, essentially aren't white, right? Or I guess another way to look at it is people who aren't, um, family first, right? The idea of the family unit is often like when you think of close your eyes and you think of the family unit, you think of 1950s white house with a white picket fence, and you got two kids, and they're all your wife is white, the husband's white, and the two kids are white, and that's America. And it's that's a pretty strong relation from that 50s McCarthy era to what Donald Trump is doing today. It's the same thing that was going on in the 70s with Nixon and the Southern strategy. It's, it's otherizing, and it's saying if you're not this one thing, you're bad, or you're not American. And, that's, it's a narrow view. It's trying to it's narrowing the what's American into one box and saying if you're not this, then you're not American. So yeah, I mean, communist sympathizer. I mean, what we say now is not that. We say Marxist, right? It's just the new fancy word that we use to say that you're not American or you're not democratic or whatever. So
Yeah. No,
yeah,
I thought there was some ties there, and I know maybe we'll save that for a different show, but it just felt to me like, okay, Chaplin was being faced with some of that. And if somehow we got to this point where these type of rhetoric started taking place again within the government, what would that mean for Hollywood as we know it today? You know what I mean? Like what other actors would be exiled and relocated from across on the map? So just an interesting thought. It seems like hyperbole. It seems like hysteria. But again, no one thought we'd be where we are right now with this type of rhetoric even having a place. Because it
yeah,
also seems counterintuitive or counter culture to everything that, the progressives have made, all those steps. So that's why you call it a counter revolution. I get it.
there it is.
I think I'm learning too, buddy. Okay. There you have it. Charlie Chaplin, we've spoken enough about you. Actually, the last thing I'll say is he never did win an Oscar for any of his performances. He did win an honorary award in 1972, which was the reason he came back to the States and the one and only time that he came back to the States. And you
Okay.
can catch that on YouTube. It's actually dated or noted to be the longest standing ovation in the history of the Oscars. He got a 12-minute standing ovation. So at the end, even though he never got an Oscar, he did get his flowers. And kudos to him for that. So we move on. The next movie we will watch took place in April 21st, 1928, Passion of Joan of Arc. We talked a little bit when we were doing our draft episode. Have you done any more research, or do you kind of like to go in a little bit unknowing at first and then do more at the end? What's your process for
Right.
this?
No, I'm trying. I want to try to watch all these movies without doing too much. Like, hey, what's this movie exactly about, or who are all the people in it? I like to do that like right after I watch the movie, so I obviously know what this movie is about because I know who Jonah d'Arc is. Right, I know who she is historically, so I can I can imagine what this movie is about without doing too much research.
But hey, that might play a part though, because now you have prior knowledge on something where with the jazz singer, you didn't. I mean, outside of like, jazz
Sure.
music and things of that nature, but as far as the character in
Right.
the heart of the movie, right? So
Mhm.
that might impact the way you see this. You might disagree with a direction that they took, or even find something to be not factual or whatever.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Um,
Sure.
and to me, I got to be honest with you. When I first watched this, which was 20 some years ago, I didn't have any prior knowledge. And I just took away from it everything as kind of matter of fact, but like I took away the performance.
Mm.
And that's what I want you to, as you're watching this, to kind of do your best with the prior knowledge to like, okay, watch this performance. Cause I'm hoping
Okay.
when I go back, I'm gonna watch it and it's gonna validate what I'm saying right now, that it still stands out, and I'm glad that we're spending time on it. So
Okay. No, I'm excited. Listen, the you know me, and not necessarily everyone that might find this podcast knows me, but I mean, the thing I struggle with most is belief, right? I mean, that's one of the things that I have a hard time with, and that this is about that, right? I'm excited to see it because I like it when that struggle with belief is put into a story for others to not just sympathize with, but to almost like a thought exercise to internalize that struggle. So I mean, I would imagine I'm going to like this movie. So
okay. Well,
yep.
I'm just gonna leave it at that. Will, I love doing this with you. This is our third episode already, buddy. We're rolling now. So
Yeah. Well, here we go.
Here we go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, if you are been hanging out with us this long, Passion of the Joan of Arc, check that out as a French film. It came out in April. We're doing everything chronologically. It is 2 of the 6 films that we drafted for this year. We'll see you on down the road. Will, see you next week, buddy.
All right, man. See you.